What has transpired at WB Games since the release of Batman Arkham Knight needs to be studied. Incompetence of the highest levels. Some of the biggest IP laid to waste, one of the most exciting and innovative game systems to ever grace video games left to rot, and the formula of what makes a successful superhero video game squandered. WB are now paying the price, taking monumental losses on their live service titles, having a barren few years to look ahead to, and faffing around with studios who are now bleeding talent thanks to frustration of poor leadership. I've said my piece on the Wonder Woman game being rebooted, WB Games Montreal being faffed about, and the overall failure of their live service push. Today, I want to turn my attention to how do we fix this? Video games are more difficult than ever, more complex, and ultimately more expensive. I often don't envy the big decision makers, but I sit here after all the news last week and genuinely, I could have done 10 times a better job. The sheer incompetence to lead a video game division with IP including Batman, Superman, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, and just everything under the WB umbrella. I mean, for the big head honcho to not even play games. I don't understand. How can you make decisions on what players want if you have no experience? WB is in a mess. No big titles in the next 2 years, a Batman game years away, and who knows if Wonder Woman will ever see the light of day. And it always comes back to leadership, and there is just too many cases of this happening right now in the video game industry. Bungie, Sony, and so many people just squandering the potential of what their talent can do at their studios because of a live service push or ill management. And I'm sick of it. So how do we fix this? How can WB Games recover from this inept idiocracy at the top level? So I'm going to be going through 5 core pillars that WB Games needs to work on so that they can get back from this. It's not going to recover overnight. This is going to be a process, and us as fans, we're going to be waiting a while. First key pillar. What's the short-term turnaround? How can WB get some cash into the business, throw the players a bone, and give them something to get going? If I'm at the top at WB right now, we need quick wins. I am immediately looking at getting both Arkham Knight and Arkham Origins either remastered or remade for Unreal Engine 5. A good example of this is the Ninja Gaiden announcements that we've just had. Ninja Gaiden 4 is due out at the end of this year, but they also dropped Ninja Gaiden 2 Black on Game Pass and for sale. Arkham Knight is a game that is locked at 30 frames per second even on PS5 and Series X. Arkham Origins is locked to the PS3 generation. Everyone has been asking for a long time, can we get these frame rates unlocked? As WB, I would be immediately greenlighting these games to be at the very least remastered as a short-term project, because the Arkham games are timeless. They are played year on year and year, and the only way to experience both of those games above 30 frames per second is on PC. And let me tell you, PC, playing at 60 frames, these games feel so much better. And especially when you add some lighting mods in there, Arkham Knight to this day looks like a 2025 game. But I'm not just looking at remasters and remakes, I'm looking at collaborations. Marvel games are the kings of this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm looking at Fortnite. Can I get some DC skins in there? Another DC season. I'm looking at the upcoming Superman movie. Can we get DC and Superman in as many different games as possible and create these partnerships in a Superman skin and get some quick cash into the business? WB won't be able to just whip up a game in 2 years. They need money. Collaborations and remasters are the blueprint for WB just to get some money in the door so that they can go on and fund these bigger projects. The final key thing that they need to be doing is getting eyes on that Wonder Woman project. With it being rebooted last year, we need to be making sure that that ship is steady. And the idea that they scrapped the Nemesis system, I understand that, sure, maybe it didn't work bringing Wonder Woman's enemies and making them friends and befriending them, but you don't have to scrap the system altogether. The Nemesis system is special. At least have it so when you defeat an enemy, they come back and they adapt to how you defeat them so you can't beat them that way, and they set a trap for you. That's what made the Nemesis system just as good, not just befriending them. And I still think that it's so perfect for a Wonder Woman game. The idea of no longer using that system is silly. If it didn't work, forget it, but use aspects. Reactivity in a video game offers replayability and endless hours of play. It can be the unique selling point of your game that distinguishes it from the other 500 AAA third-person superhero action-adventure games. If they don't get eyes on this Wonder Woman project, it's going to cost them hundreds of millions more on top of the $100 million that it's already cost so far. And regardless of what the sales turn out to be, it might not be enough for what WB needs. They need to make sure that it's on the right path, because if it's not, the other 4 pillars that I'm talking about might not even matter. That's pillar 1. Pillar 2, licensing. There is no better example than looking next door at Marvel Games and the fantastic model that they have over there. They've had some misses, sure, pairing Crystal Dynamics with a live service Avengers game, but you look at the pairings now, and they are immaculate. Insomniac with Spider-Man, Blade with Arcane, Midnight Suns with Firaxis, even down to NetEase and Marvel Rivals. DC has spent the last 10 years trying to do it all themselves, and you just can't manage all of that IP with 4 studios, especially with how long games take to make now. One thing they need, at a time where they've suffered huge losses, don't just make big bets. This won't please everyone, but not every game needs to be a 300 million third-person action-adventure game. Think of these games that they might license out as comic book issues. Of course we want our big powerhouse games. Don't be afraid to go indie or AA. A cyborg-inspired 2D Metroidvania like Metroid Dread. A Justice League Dark which is like XCOM. A John Constantine very narrative heavy like Citizen Sleeper. Game of Thrones being an RTS. WB's problem is that it feels like the next thing can't fail. It has to be so big to justify the gap and the expense. Everything now has to be a Hogwarts Legacy, and that's just not sustainable. The video game landscape needs a variety of big and small projects. They should license out their big IP too to the studios that want it. It might be best to start with the household names. For example, we know that in the next few years we're going to have a Superman movie, a Supergirl movie, and a Lantern show. We can't expect them to get the timelines right so that a game comes out at the same time as the movie, but by the time that a game could be made, you would hope that the DCU has been successful enough to provide that synergy so that people already know about these characters, even more so than how successful they are in comic books in general. And regardless of how DC has fared on the movie front in the last decade, you just can't convince me that studios out there would not want to make their own Superman game, or Teen Titans, Martian Manhunter, Harry Potter. These are characters with decades of stories and fanfare and global fan bases. Licensing out games too will reduce the enormous amount of pressure that's currently placed on Rocksteady, WB Montreal, Monolith, Avalanche, and NetherRealm. It reminds me a lot of Halo, where everything is just waiting for 343, who are now called Halo Studios, with what their game is, and the amount of pressure that was on them from Xbox before they went and gobbled up all these extra studios. That pressure just mounted and mounted, and it took its toll and it felt heavy and rushed. Licensing will work, but they have to make sure they don't make the same mistakes that they've made internally. Rocksteady were never equipped for a live service game. Don't go asking Crystal Dynamics to make another live service when they could make a perfectly great single-player Green Arrow game. They've already shown a great example of a good pairing with licensing with Batman Arkham Shadows and Camouflage, a VR game so good it stands amongst Arkham's best. And I know everyone now just wants more than just Batman, but even a 2D Batman game styled in Batman the Animated Series art style, stuff like that could work. Leverage the big IP first, as Marvel did with Spider-Man and Avengers, and then place more bets big and small. Spread out the genres, the budgets, and offer variety. I've spoke to so many people, and including myself, people would love a DC Ultimate Alliance game. They'd love a DC Metroidvania. And they don't always have to be the big names. Look at the impact of Jethro Landshark or Luna Snow in Marvel Rivals. They don't have to be these household names, they just need to be well designed, fun, and distinct. And it's not just about licensing the IP either. If you're not going to use the Nemesis system, let somebody else use it, rather than just locking it away to be forgotten about. Licensing can help expand IP that is currently dormant, and reduce the pressure that's on their in-house studios. Speaking of in-house studios, Pillar 3, their own teams. There's no doubt that over the past couple of years, as a result of frustration with management, they've suffered a lot of talent bleed in WB. It's probably not the same Rocksteady or WB Montreal, but that doesn't mean there aren't still exceptionally talented people at these studios still. Suicide Squad, despite the lack of experience in the live service realm or the looter shooter, almost walked into a competent one in regards to its build crafting. With Rocksteady going back to Batman, it makes sense, right? Let them cook and trust them to do what they feel is best, whether that's a fresh Batman universe or a continuation of Arkham. Don't force a DCU tie-in or put pressure on continuing the Arkham name. Let them tell the story and build the world that they want to build. Avalanche, WB Montreal, these are talented single-player studios. Let them make single-player games, the ones they want to make. Swen Vinky said it best during his Game Awards speech. He said, quote, "The studio made their game because they wanted to make a game they wanted to play themselves." End quote. Those always turn out to be the best games. If WB Games Montreal wanted to make a Flash game, let them make a Flash game. This idea that the Flash movie had any kind of bearing on WB Games Montreal making a movie is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. A great example, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I believe it was called. People didn't really love it. It was okay at best for a lot of people. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle by Machine Games last year came out, people adore it. There can absolutely be synergy in a positive way, and that the two can go really well together, but I don't buy into this notion of movies affecting the games. I really don't. Not to mention, The Flash hasn't had a game. People want that. I'm getting wound up again, let's just get back to it. When the studios get to play to their strengths, that's when it works. They've got a wealth of IP. So much of it that it's just being left idle on a gaming front. Let your studios, with a clear plan, present the game that they want to make, not the one that they think you want them to make. Which brings us to Pillar 4, leadership. Everything that I've just mentioned in the above points all depends and hinges on good leadership. Everything that WB has not had in the past decade. We cannot forget that this is a business. Games have to make money. I'm not in denial of any of that. But the leader of a game decision needs some bearing on the landscape of video games. A personal trainer should have a level of health and fitness that you aspire to. A plumber needs to know how a toilet works. A CEO of a gaming division should have played a video game or have experience in the dealings of them. I don't care if their motivator is money, which with any CEO it always is. You can't make logical decisions without having at least some experience in the field. It's also not just leadership at the very top. It's leadership on the games too. Before a project begins, you should know the game you're making, the identity of it, the core of it, and who this is for. It doesn't always work out, but look at WB Montreal, dossing about with Gotham Knights 2, Constantine, and The Flash. Imagine just being an employee there, a fan of DC. 3 different IP you're excited to develop, and not one gets even close to seeing the light of day. You're being taken for a ride. They are taking the piss out of you. No wonder you would want to leave. When you're in a position of power and leadership, you gotta look after your people. Going from project to project, waiting months to hear back on what game you're making, this is not good leadership. This is ignorance and selfishness, which will ultimately cost people their livelihood. The final pillar, the pillar of patience. You've spent the last decade royally fucking things up. Do not expect over the course of a few months everything to be alright. As someone who works as a fat loss coach, it reminds me of working with people who are extremely overweight. Through years of poor decision making and not being active, that after a good few weeks on a diet, they expect it all to just fly off. And that's just not how it works. Years of poor decisions put you in this place. It's going to take time, the right practices, and patience to get you where you want. The next 2 years, WB are going to suffer heavily. Helped maybe by a supposed Lego game, new Hogwarts content and mobile stuff, but it's about the pipeline after these 2 years. Ensuring that when the dominoes start falling, they don't stop. If they can recover the Wonder Woman game, WB Montreal can make headway on their supposed Game of Thrones game, Rocksteady give a successful return to Batman, and WB put their best foot forward in terms of licensing out their games, that once these 2 to 3 years of pain is over, we could be looking at a successful WB Games again. Reduced pressure on internal studios, broader coverage of the monumental amount of idle IP they have, big bets leveraged by smaller projects to keep momentum and provide a variety of experience for the players. These are the 5 pillars that I believe WB Games needs to work on. Usually, as an outsider, I'd watch a video game like this and I'd be like, that's a bit of like backseating CEOing going on right there. But I generally sit here and think, I could have done a better job. You watching this could have done a better job. I don't understand how this has been allowed to happen, and I don't understand how you can be so incompetent at the highest level for this to happen. I don't think there's a possibility where this actually gets worse other than WB Games closing down altogether. None of this is easy, by the way. It all sounds simple, but in reality, it never is. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. Let's be clear. In Batman Arkham, WB had everything Marvel Games wanted. While Marvel faffed around with movie tie-ins, Batman Arkham delivered a new standard of superhero video games. Now that title belongs to Marvel, that offers a breadth of genres of its superheroes, turn-based PvP, action-adventure, immersive sim, mobile offerings, and a big slate of exciting releases to look forward to, while DC is faffed about with live service and cancelling games. In a decade where video games have become more safer, more formulaic, WB stumbled on the Nemesis system, one of the most exciting, dynamic systems I've ever experienced in a video game, that can change the way that you interact with a world and sandbox, and that in 7 years hasn't done a single thing with it. That owns one of the most successful TV shows ever in Game of Thrones, that admittedly had one of the worst endings ever, but we won't talk about that, but didn't even think to create a big video game to accompany it and synergize. No alternate timeline of a video game, a Kingdom Come inspired feeling game, just a Telltale game that most people don't even know exists. It's incompetence of the highest level. It's like Marvel went in there and planted a mole at the top of WB Games. That's what it's like, an inside job. I joke, of course, I don't care for comic book wars, console wars and all that tribal nonsense. But that's how it feels. It feels like someone went in there to fuck it up for them. Because I don't know how you could have handled this worse. 6 years between Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight. 9 years between Arkham Knight and Suicide Squad. It's just sad. There is still opportunity to turn this around, but it's going to require a lot from those at the top. I just don't know if they're capable of a turnaround of this magnitude. We may moan about Last of Us Remastered or Horizon Remastered, but they do it because they sell well, and it helps with the bigger projects. I just don't think that level of planning happens at WB at the top level. Otherwise, surely we would have got an Origins remaster by now. I hope, I pray, that WB can do it. That, if they remain patient, they place big and small bets, leverage their existing IP and products to make short-term bonuses, they stop letting their people down, and they bring in clear, strong leadership that the fans, the employees, and these renowned IPs deserve. That's just my thoughts on how to fix WB Games. You agree with me? Is there anything that you would add that you feel I've missed out? And speaking of licensing, now that WB Games are doing it, what is your dream studio to IP partnership? I'd really love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, I'd enjoy you leaving a like, and if comic book games coverage is what you're after, news, reviews, guides, streams, the full shebang, that's what we do around here, so consider subscribing. I'd love to have you around. Regardless, all my socials are linked in the description down below, so you can find me down there if you've got anything else for me. Regardless, I hope you have a terrific day. Play games, get gains, and I'll catch you next one.